Hi, Phil. How are you? Thanks for joining.
Thank you very much. Yes, feeling a little apprehensive actually about this one, but I think the main thing that all of us are sharing is that this is a very complicated area where there's a lot of interfaces with members of the public. You've got obviously city authorities, and I wanted to cover today really that relationship between the local government sector and people who have an interest in smart cities, whether they're citizens groups all the way through to suppliers.
Brilliant. That's great. Yeah, I think also in the last year, I mean, it's always been about the climate crisis for at least the last 10 years. But I think the COVID-19 crisis also sped up a lot of developments. Is that something that you've experienced?
Yes, I mean, I think it certainly focused where the technology now is fit for purpose. I think people were surprised how well working from home has worked, but there are certain things around the level of data that we hold, the sort of customer insight and all those sorts of things that meant that we had models from the past and we were able to understand them, but actually what are they informing us as they move forward? Are they real time? So there's certainly there's plenty of barriers there that have kind of come to the fore. I also think just how people will interact with their local areas, that's fundamentally shifted. So we are experiencing something unique.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's really interesting. But I think most of our attendees want to find out a little bit more about you before we get started. I don't know if you have that in the beginning of your presentation, but as I said, this is Phil. He's Assistant Director of Parking for the London Borough of Barnet. Phil, can you please tell us a little bit more about your role in the world of parking?
Yes, I mean, it does what it says on the tin. The Assistant Director for Parking is kind of the most senior person in Barnet Council with overall responsibility for the parking service. So we are integrating all of the parking elements under the service. That means everything that's coming from design all the way through to resident services, permits, disabled badges. So that all falls under there. My personal history is that I've worked in parking now since 2005, where I started working for Camden Council. And that was just, I just wanted to live in London. I saw a job where I would answer some letters about parking tickets, didn't have a car, didn't really care. So I thought that would be a quick job. And actually, I think as you find in the parking industry, people go, oh, you chose that photo, goodness. People come into the industry because it might well be something that they intend to be in for a shortish period. But there's such a range of careers in there, and I've worked in the contracting side, I've worked on the local government side, and kind of this role brings everything together. And what Barnet Council's recently shifted it from a head of service role to an assistant director role, because they really see that actually something around parking, it sits very much about how the public realm works. It sits in economic and regeneration terms. It's a really critical role and it's a really critical service. It's about air quality, and obviously it's about everything that's relating to how people are going to have modal shift, how we're going to as we respond to COVID-19 and the way people have changed their behaviours. What are the new travel patterns going to look like? I think anybody who's been in London has probably experienced how difficult it is to drive around at certain times, and that simply isn't going to be sustainable. But do we say people are going to get onto buses when they're still not comfortable, or have we provided enough cycling facilities? All those sorts of things are still to be answered. So this I think is an interesting role to be in. London Borough of Barnet is there's always a competition between a couple of boroughs as to who's the biggest by acreage or by population. We're normally one or two of the other. I probably get my knuckles wrapped for not knowing quite which one we are. But it's a large borough, and we are estimating to add another 50,000 citizens before 2035. And that's within the same finite road space. If all of them have got aspirations to bring cars, it's all going to come to a standstill. So lots of active intervention really needed in between now and that date. And part of what we're doing at the moment is a a comprehensive CPZ program just to make sure that we've got the right coverage. But it's going to need much more than that in the terms of kind of public realm and town centres and those areas. But I didn't really want to go too much into what I do. Lots of people here will have their own jobs. What I wanted to talk about really was kind of some of the pitfalls that people may experience when interacting with local government.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, as you said, London is of course immense, and so there's as I understand, a real struggle into convincing people to get more comfortable using public transport and getting less cars on the road. And I mean, if that's a real struggle, what do you guys do at the moment to try and convince, the public?
I mean, we have a few tensions that are almost unresolvable. We want people to feel that they can come back to their local areas. We want people to be able to go to work, and we want people to be able to, enjoy leisure facilities and, non-essential retail, all the things that really made the difference between the basic living form that we had to get down to and what makes places enjoyable and, free time actually feel like something worth having. And the car has been something that's enabled people to do that at a time when other forms of transport had to cut their capacity. I mean, I don't know how many people here are from London, but seeing a sign in the front of the bus that says full. I mean, normally the full sign was when people literally couldn't get themselves onto the bus, and now you'd have 30 people on the bus, and that bus was full, and you're just going past stops of people who were waiting. And so clearly the public transport network hasn't been able to meet the old capacity demands, but the old capacity demands aren't there either. And the journey patterns have changed. Instead of the radial commutes into the centre or to key areas where there are, Heathrow, big employment hub, changed completely. So you've seen those journey patterns change. People are travelling within their own local area a lot more, and we'd like to capture more of those journeys as things that are on foot or by cycle, people taking the children to school. Similarly, we'd like to see people shift how they do that. But you can't just say, right, there's a crisis now, you need to change how you've set your life up, because you may have a job that's over here, children over here, and a husband way up there. So that doesn't change overnight, and public sector employees are mindful of that.
Yeah, so we can only go as fast as the people want us to go. That's basically then the point. Phil, you also prepared a presentation for our audience, so I'm gonna make you the presenter of this webinar. If you can please then share your presentation on the screen. There we go. So I don't want to eat up too much of your presentation time, Phil. Is there anything you'd like to share with us before you take it away?
No, just to everybody who's listening, first of all, thank you for taking time out of today to listen to me. I'm not sure I've got that many insights that are going to be new to everybody, but hopefully there's enough here that will help people understand how local government thinks to an extent, and how we actually operate in practical terms. If there are any questions people have got, they can kind of pop up as we go along. I think it's probably easier because we'll be in certain themes. There's nothing about this that has to be done in a certain way. There's not lots of fancy pictures and video. There's really just a few prompts for me to kind of talk about the things that in my day-to-day job come up repeatedly and have been barriers to us potentially delivering as much as we could have, or getting the innovation right. So I think, part of this is about giving hints and tips, I suppose.
Perfect. So that means for the audience, please, as I said in the beginning, on the right side, you have your menu bar from Go to Webinar, and there's a little button called Chat, and you can use that to ask questions. And Phil, if we have a bunch of questions, I'll make sure to briefly interrupt you so you can answer them. But please use the chat function on the right side, everyone, to ask the questions. Melissa has just sent a message in that same module of the software, so you can find it there and type your question, and we're really happy to forward your question to Phil. So Phil, without further ado, thanks for the great intro, and please take your time.
Okay.
Enjoy.
Okay. Sorry, I gave my quick introduction there. You know, we talk about smart cities. We talk about things that are either novel to us or we're already using them. You know, a couple of years ago, councils were talking about what would be the impact of 5G. I think some of us were looking at it with open eyes, thinking it might solve certain financial problems because there were, you know, it could potentially be using public assets like lamp columns. Skip forward a couple of years and already a lot of us have got 5G on our phones. Not quite sure where the signals are coming from, and you know, it's very much an emergent technology, but you know, for local government, some of the kind of crystal ball reading is really difficult. Knowing where the technology is going is difficult, and for a lot of lay people as well, things like the Internet of Things, lots of terminology used around how we explore data, and how we kind of, you know, when people are talking about the sharing economy and things like that, certainly my parents would look at me a little blank-eyed and then say, "That's very nice, dear," and go about their business because they are very used to what they're used to. So that pervades in local government too. We're here to serve the people. We also reflect the people, and we do. You know, where we've got these incredible, exciting, emergent technologies, which we know will change the world. We don't necessarily know in what direction, and we've only got, you know, we've got a large potential to shape that, but whether we actually access that potential really comes down to, in my view, kind of 5 things. And it's about people. That's our citizenry, but it's also the sort of personalities of people who are working in the private sector, as well as you know, kind of the person who's actually going to use any technology or service that's changing. You've got the politics of it. I think I'm always surprised by how many private sector suppliers to local government will still have very little understanding of the importance of politics in almost everything that happens. We've got procurement, obviously very much governed by law, but also a really important process by which that interaction between the private sector and the public sector gets established. And actually, where I think we make some of our bigger mistakes insofar as kind of understanding of each other. Priorities, you know, strategy, where we're going, who sets the agenda, you know, and actually, is there an agenda that can be set when there are things that are, you know, so moving forward very quickly. And then kind of what is the weight of previous experiences on all of the above? You know, we're all creatures of our past, and how does that influence how we interact with things going forward? So talking about people, I think we've all seen these amazing CGI images of cities, and you know, wouldn't it be lovely if they jumped off the page? And it would be equally lovely if they would keep themselves that clean. Cars would park in that way, buses would turn up just when you arrive at the bus stop, and all those sorts of things. And you know, the more technology that we've got in our hands, the more that some of those things are able to be done. But actually, you know, we still live in the real world. We've still got that person who just before the bus turned up at that bus stop, stuck their car down there. We've got, you know, local government tied up with legislation that in some cases is over 150 years old. So, you know, there's a rich mix of things in there that make it difficult for us to operate. And the reality is that's good, because difficulty is about people's independence. So when we're talking about, you know, why hasn't the CGI city jumped off the page? It never will. But you know, the things that are going to make some of the things in technology terms attractive, or that are going to help us drive forward our policy agenda, will be about how people interact with that on the most basic things. You know, the cost of doing things, the convenience of doing things, and the compatibility with what they've already got. You know, people who've already invested in a car may not necessarily feel that they've got the capacity to then go out and get an e-bike, or that they're you know, they're going to be also using a car club because they have their own version of that. So over time, you've got, you know, you've got the pieces of technology that will become embedded, but we'll never see that CGI become real. And I'm a big fan of, you know, Westminster's Park Right app, and I think it was a very interesting piece of technology, but even 33 of those on my phone for all of London, it's not a realistic proposition. So, you know, sometimes aspirations and some of these great example things that are made that come out of our smart cities agendas, they are more, they're sort of more to lead us in a certain direction than necessarily being the endpoint destination themselves. I've put there, you know, build it and they will walk past. We have probably an early adopter advantage in Barnet of having a huge take up of cashless. We have very little go through our pay and display machines now. 97% of transactions go through cashless, and that's brought us a lot of benefits. But many of those transactions are still, a third of them go through tech systems. And in the long term, you know, if we want to develop apps that could interact with our citizenry, that we're going to, you know, potentially look at promoting our town centres or promoting walking and cycling, that could be very location based. If a third of the people who are using our services still come through by texting, something that, you know, somebody under the age of 25 would barely know what it was, that's really, you know, that's a real limiting factor, but it is the reality that we have to deal with in the here and now. And I do sometimes wonder whether it's better to be the followers than necessarily the leaders in all areas. So moving forward, sorry, I went too far. Yes, redundancy, I think, is a big concern that exists in local government. You know, we've got to be very careful about how we spend our money. And I've got an Apple Watch that I thought was the most amazing thing for at least 3 weeks after I got it. And then I thought it looked really nice for about another 3 weeks after that. And then I thought the charging was a bit inconvenient, and that actually I already had a phone with the clock on it and all the other things that the watch did. But there were people out there who were tapping away at them, making it look really impressive. It's in a drawer somewhere, and I don't think I'll ever get the use out of that other people have. But we can't do that in the public sector. You know, you put a big investment in, you can't have it go and sit in the drawer. You know, questions get asked about, was that a good use of public money? And I think we already know some of the decisions that we're making have been the wrong ones. You know, put some EV chargers in places where they would be slightly out of the way because we weren't sure that EV cars were going to turn up to use them. You know, now we know that people are going to want to have them prominently in their town centres, places of work, leisure. So having done that, we've made some mistakes there, but obviously things that we're learning from. I don't think bay sensors personally were as well used as they could have been. And again, possibly in the same vein of a city the size of London having 33 boroughs, and you've got, you know, if you've all got to have different apps, and you know the data's available here but not there, just around the corner. How useful is that in terms of real people who want to come to a locality and just want to understand, you know, in simple terms, how do they park, go to a business, and leave without a parking ticket? I don't think all of these technologies have yet given the end user the sort of depth of benefit that could have come from that. But these are first generation items, so I think, you know, learning a lot about how people interacted with them and why that didn't work, I think is really important, certainly in local government, but also from the private sector, because, you know, you can't keep selling something if actually the users in the local government or the user in the members of the public haven't managed to extract the benefits from it fully.
So
I think,
Phil,
yeah.
we've got a question, and so indeed, I think, you know, 33 different apps for just London is absolutely not going to work. So if there was one app that covered all the boroughs, like a one-stop Westminster Park, right? That would be a clear benefit for the whole city. Is that something that you've been speaking about to solution providers? I mean, it should be possible to have one app to cover the whole city of London.
Yeah, I mean, we're normally a little bit kind of in the shadow of Amsterdam, who've normally done something just slightly more innovative and sensible than we do. And we say that would be nice, and then sort of think that it's never going to happen because you've got 33 boroughs and it's all far too hard. I know that London Council colleagues have worked very hard on on this kind of concept in the past, and it was about, do we have a clearinghouse model for the transaction, so you're provider neutral, and you then are having those transactions come from lots of different places. The data goes through to the enforcement operative, and they use that. It's one idea. I use that in Germany, where I went up to a pay and display machine, and it had 5 different apps, none of which I had, and I picked the one in the top right because that was the first one I looked at. I had no customer insight information as to whether that would be cheaper, more expensive, whether it was going to give me enhanced benefits or anything like that. So it might be that one front app would be appropriate, but how do you pick that? The procurement processes that have seen different councils have different providers are because there are different selling benefits to those. Some of them are more price conscious, some of them are more technology rich, and actually that moves over time. So difficult to know how you shift that relationship. I think I've been surprised that the car providers and Google haven't yet, particularly Google and Apple, haven't yet sort of come in and swept all that up. But it does feel, you could end up with somebody who sits above all that and just says, yeah, we'll go and do it on your map-based system within your phone. I'm not sure about where the technology is going to go on that. And I'm also not quite sure what the relationship would be between the boroughs and that service if they also have an intermediary service. But I certainly think the sort of balkanization of 33 different versions of that, and then underneath all those, you've got many different versions of terms and conditions. Whether you can top up your payment, how long is your max stay, how long until you can repark. It was really very difficult for consumers to navigate that, and yet technology is coming in and helping them with that too, because you can get apps that help avoid getting parking tickets. And I'm not going to get into naming individual ones, but certainly there's been strong innovation in that area. So
yeah,
to answer that question, I think watch and see, but it's not helpful, probably just the sheer complexity of local government, certainly in the UK. But I don't think we had the right conversations at the right time when this technology was emergent to see off this. I think that was a missed opportunity. But we probably can do this again if we then are moving into things that are much more GPS based rather than codes that you punch into phones, which will seem antiquated soon enough, I think. So maybe that'll be the next round.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Phil. So again, for the audience, if you also have a question for Phil, just use the chat on your right, and we'll make sure to ask Phil your question. Thanks, Phil.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we don't know so much about is our data, and I'll come to data a little bit later on. And I think the data that we could be exploring already would be telling us a lot more than it is. And I was surprised that there was the ability to get footfall data for town centres just based on the devices picking up information already in a way that I wasn't aware that they do, just as you're going around town centres, and it's anonymised. It doesn't tell anybody what journeys are going on, but it's helped us just monitor what footfall levels have been, despite having had no sensors in the town centres. And that's really good. If you can use small devices that people have already paid for, rather than investing in an expensive camera network that will have a long-term maintenance cost, and you won't ever be able to get that historical data. That's a really smart way to deliver that. But I think there's a lot of data that we hold right now that we've not even thought about using. So conceptualizing smart cities intrinsically are systems, and they're evolutions of systems and continual evolutions of systems. And that's not something that local government has got all of the answers to, and not necessarily should be involved in giving all the answers to. It would stymie some of the technology innovation that has really driven the parking sector forward. But we also, we can't ignore it, and we have a key role in kind of stitching up together all these different parts where that's possible. And I didn't finish my sentence there, but if we could conceptualize what a smart city system would actually look like and sat down and said, right, how do we build this, and how do we procure out all these elements? There's no way that we could afford to do that as it stood now. Whether it's things relating to the electricity grid, and then EV charging, and then the potential for vehicles to be batteries, the income opportunity that's from that. I think a lot of people still are stuck in local government thinking the EV charging points are, they're expensive, not high utilization, and there's no way we're going to turn a profit from them. But actually, when you think about them as alternatives to batteries, and how it can help with the grid, and there's things there that we don't in local government normally ever think about. When we explore those kind of opportunities, I don't think we can afford not to imagine what a smart city will look like in our own municipality, because there could be an income opportunity or a cost saving for our citizens that we're really missing. So I think that's a key kind of element of thinking behind local government, but I think it's also key for players in the industry to be reaching out with through mediums such as this, but also through potential briefings that help embed that level of understanding about this as a system, because we've bought EV chargers and we've bought lots of different things, and we've not necessarily stitched those up together. Yeah, so I think that's a thing that we don't do very well. Yeah, and just as a quick reminder, really, that when we are creating these sorts of complex systems, we don't want to make them too complicated that you really need a degree to use them. They need to be great for people to use who've got a range of disabilities and those sorts of things, and that complexity of a system shouldn't be an excuse for it either not working or being too difficult to fix. Moving on to the politics of it, and that's an area that I don't think, I don't always see the private sector having a good understanding of it. Parking is probably one of the most political parts of the council. It's one of my directors once called it a lose-lose situation. I think she overstated the case. There was a £20 million budget that came in that actually was a real win to supporting public sector provision. But it is very political, and I always put it in this context. Almost everybody in a city will have had an interaction with parking, even if they didn't leave their house today, because they do expect the waste vehicles to come and collect their waste. They expect the fire service to attend if there's a fire, or they expect their Amazon deliveries to be coming to their front door. So even if you haven't left your home, you're relying on the roads and the transport network. So when something goes wrong, when people can't drive on the road where there's problems, that often goes to the local ward members for an area, and they expect to get answers, and they come into the parking sector very, very quickly. And that, if you imagine that's 365 days a year in Barnet, you've got 350,000 people, the millions of transactions, millions of interactions that we're having every year. We're going to get lots of complaints, lots of potential issues there. So kind of having private sector operators that understand this and that are very attuned to heading off those sorts of things, or make sure that they've had conversations explaining either what their new technology is providing or what their services are providing. That's really, I think that's really kind of going to be quite key when we bring new initiatives out. One of the areas that I get comments about already and people are concerned about is electric scooters. And there was a child who was unfortunately hit in a park. And actually that came at just the wrong time for the council, because we were also looking at being part of one of the demonstrator schemes. But the sort of sharp withdrawal of political support because of one incident that can really set the agenda for a decade. Private sector operators can really help councils and council staff in those sorts of areas if they can articulate more clearly kind of what the benefits of their technology are, rather than just sort of blindly selling it to lots of people, and understanding how that sits within air quality and similar things is really key to that. I think for councils, you know, we've got, yeah, I put down there that major transport schemes have changed election outcomes, and there's probably one or two councils in London in the last decade where things that got a lot of local news airtime probably saw a change of administration in a council. And I very often find when I go in to talk to my ward members, or where I talk to different parties, different political parties, they actually will respond completely differently to the same idea based on where it's been used before, or whether they perceive it to be kind of in their camp or outside of their camp. That's not necessarily a barrier to people wanting to engage with this as politicians, but packaging of that is key. And I would, to any private sector operator that was going in to talk to a council of a certain persuasion, is don't go in there handing out leaflets that show a council that's administered by their own opposition, in their council, because it's one of those things that they just, they don't feel it's necessarily their kind of initiative. And just a subtle change of a word can actually change whether they're interested or not. Packaging, I think that's really key, but that also is about how that feels for the user. Using kind of local branding, that can be really good. And if you want to understand a little bit about, what's going on in an area, go on some of the council's committees. You've got lots of recordings, meetings there. I sit on an area committee that deals with a lot of concerns for Finchley and Golders Green, and you really, that's where people come and speak to the council in the first instance, and you get a lot of really raw views, and it can be quite pugilistic, but you also get a lot of really rapid responses. So whether that's to a new scheme, or if you put in a closure at a certain point, you can get that kind of response from members of the public, and it can be quite insightful. And I think as we will become more technology led in the council's interventions, for kind of private sector operators to really think about the politics here is key. And as with anything, if you're building long-term relationships, if you've talked to people for a while about the ideas, and if you've evolved together your ideas, you're going to have a lot more support as you're trying to get innovation and technology through, because it will otherwise be a barrier to delivery.
Phil,
sorry.
So another question. Can you explain a little bit more about how difficult it is, and how much time is spent trying to make your communication to the public more sexy and inclusive for your borough?
Well, sexy and inclusive are two different things. I think engaging and inclusive would probably be how I would term that, which is, making sure that when you're communicating to people, it's something that they're not going to just look the other way from. But I think inclusivity is the much more important one there, because I think as we get more technology led, the potential to exclude people from potential benefits of change is significant. I think also to assume that people are able to make very rapid changes, for example, in vehicle ownership, is not always sustainable. So I think some of the charges that have been applied to parking fees, for example, which are really ratcheted up for diesels, if somebody made a mistake, in inverted commas, about the car that they bought, only sort of 6-7 years ago, they may well now have a very expensive mistake that every day they are being kind of more penalised for, where they may not have a personal choice there. So I think, I think the way that inclusivity needs to be looked at kind of needs quite an open interpretation as we go even further into sort of technology and data-driven solutions. Were there more questions?
Not at the moment, no. Sorry?
I'm not sure I completely answered that one. So
well, it's It's pretty clear to me. That's no problem. So if somebody has more questions regarding that topic, use the chat on your right, and Phil's really happy to answer questions if any. But until now, Phil, it looks like it's pretty clear what you want to share with our audience. Thanks.
Yeah. So priorities. Councils obviously have long-term strategies. Barnet's published its long-term transport strategy in September last year, and now we're getting into lots of different delivery work streams of that. And the long-term transport strategy has to sort of deliver some really high-level aims, but it also has to articulate that in sufficient detail that the sort of ambition of that strategy and the urgency of it to deal with, you know, the level of growth that's happening in the borough, that's meaningful. So that, you know, kind of more of the same isn't the answer to growth and traffic congestion and air quality. But it also doesn't need to, you know, we don't want to be so radical that people are unable to keep up with us. So as I was just explaining then, you know, how people's ability to change their car, change where their children may be going to school, or, you know, various things around their lives, these don't change over 6-month periods. So, you know, setting that high level strategy is something we're doing. We're delivering on that in work streams, and you know, that's probably got a 7-year timeline that strategy will be in place for. And I think that the technology providers would be very wise to be looking at some of these strategies and looking at the kind of high level aims and thinking, you know, does our product align to these sorts of aims, or what could we do with our product that would bring forward those aims? I remember, and it's moved on a lot since you know, sort of 6 or 7 years ago, but with the cashless parking industry, nobody at that point was just yet ready to make the investment to deal with diesel vehicles and air quality matters, because you know, there was a development cost to that, and sometimes the conversations would be that the council would be bearing that development cost. And at a time when all councils are eventually going to be moving that forward, I certainly thought as a sort of manager of a contract, that's not necessarily fair for me to be covering what is a business innovation, but also, you know, moving these things forward. But, you know, if businesses are looking at the strategies of councils and having conversations with councils, even if they're not in contract with them, but because they want to be forward of a future procurement, or they want to make sure that their product delivers to people who are similar to them, who will bring out similar strategies. Yeah, looking at those strategies would be a really useful thing to do. I think one of the things that we always forget is what each other's drivers are. Public sector employees are terrible at thinking that the private sector making a profit on anything is anathema to them. But if we all understand that, you know, the private sector is here not just to exist, but also to make a profit, and you know, that's related to the risk that they take on, then you understand what each other's drivers are a bit better. I think similar in the flip side is for private sector operators to not just look at the public realm as a sort of wide open business opportunity, whether that is about you know, rented items that are initially offered in the public realm. Councils have always tried to manage those relationships, are keen to work with people so that they can enable that business, they can align their strategic needs as part of the transport network, but also are not doing it in a way that suddenly sees a mountain of metal being placed by the side of the road. And you know, we've all probably seen examples of that. And I think some people are probably a little bit coloured by past experiences of these, or even seeing them just on the news, and they are, you know, they see that the private operator is just coming in here to make a buck, and they're, you know, dumping their, you know, inverted commas, rubbish on the street. Actually, a little bit of proactive engagement there, and you know, you can bring out some really innovative ideas, bit of management around that, and you know, I've seen some work that's taken place by some of the central London councils, and they manage that relationship quite well. But it's about that understanding of what each other needs. Quite often people come to the council and think that because there is an element of their their service having, virtues, or well, it's good for the environment, or we're going to bring on, something that's going to lower your carbon emissions, that automatically thinks it's free, thinks that things are going to be free. Things have to be sustainable too, and the council, funding that comes from fees and charges is really critical to funding public services. And whilst we can give away a little bit of free now, it probably isn't a long-term solution if the business can only operate when something's being given away for free. Whether that's a parking space, the centre of London did a good piece of work on what the value of those curb spaces are. They have real value. How does the council allocate that, and should it be giving it away at what is effectively a subsidy? No, probably not. So, private sector operators need to make sure that their businesses are going to wash their faces based on, contributing to the public purse, I think.
Hey, Phil, we've got another question from Aaron from the audience. So he's asking, how much are public-private partnerships an option to establish new solutions?
I certainly think, there is no one model that is the best model, and there are different things that are going to work in individual areas. I think a public-private partnership can be a good delivery model for some services, but it is one of those things that, because of the size it probably needs to be, if you're an arm's length organisation, or if you're a joint venture, something like that, the length of the contracts, when we're talking about certain smart cities things, you might not necessarily, in such a rapidly evolving technology environment, be able to codify a relationship in that way, so at that depth where you set up a joint venture. I think there are probably evolutions of that where we can be a bit more nimble, and I think, kind of help to develop delivery partnerships, or to sort of, the council be places where innovation hubs can take place. I think that's probably a slightly better utilisation of the council working with the private sector, but certainly those, it depends on the nature of the contract. Pardon me. And I think as we move into looking about how energy systems in cities are organised, particularly around the grid, who wants to take the responsibility for that, but also the potential upsides of that as well. I think those kind of conversations remain somewhat up in the air. The council owns the highway asset, but is it going to be able to sort of invest in that at a level that will be able to see us decarbonise by 2030? Not on its own, I wouldn't have thought. So there are going to be close working relationships, and it could include public-private partnerships, but it may also be concessions contracts, or different delivery vehicles. And for a city like London, for us not to try and join up with our partner boroughs, or at least, if not pan-London would be ideal, we're going to once again miss an opportunity and a need that is potentially far bigger even than cashless parking and having the right codes, or EV charging points and having a common system there. And certainly national government has recognised the need there to make sure there are, interoperable standards. So sort of moving on from priorities, procurement, really quick one, just basically about, this is very much directed at the private sector, but we have, the first thing to know is we have public sector procurement rules, and we need to be very transparent about how we do that. You are entitled to be visible to us. We aren't unable to talk to you. When we get into certain parts of procurements, we have to be very closed about how we do that, because we don't want to be seen colluding. But we do want to, we want to hear from you, and we want to understand what your technology is doing that's moving things forward. So we try and capture innovation and the aspirations that we've got in our contract specifications. And oftentimes, a private sector company is not going to think, I can influence that. Well, actually, to an extent, you can influence our understanding. So, if you get involved in things like soft market testings, when we go and get to things like the ParkX and see each other face to face, and you can bring ideas so that we can learn that, or whether it's through ParkingNet and a range of different places, making sure that you kind of bring forward use cases and try and have conversations with us will help us to make our specifications a little bit more innovative, but also possibly a little bit looser, so that we don't end up just prescribing what we had 10 years ago, because that's sometimes the problem that you end up with. I think for a technology contract, longer contracts do give councils good value for money, and they save our procurement costs, but they end up being very out of date. And there's a balance somewhere in there. If as a technology provider, you can make really strong commitments that we who buy in this year aren't going to be getting a lesser product than somebody in 3 years' time, and that you're going to keep us kind of up to date and make commitments around that. Because then we can enter into longer contracts and have a bit more confidence, and you obviously can continue to invest in your product. And I think that's one of the sort of the tensions that is in the relationship there. And oftentimes I get phone calls directly through saying, this is my product, and I say, thank you very much. Sadly, we don't actually buy your product, though we get the benefit of similar products, because we work in an integrated contract with an outsourced provider. So talk to those outsourced providers, talk to the large operators, so that you can get it to a wider audience. And then the final thing I'd talk about is development of technology within contracts. And I mentioned it before about being asked to pay for what I thought was me paying for the development of a product. But councils will work on the development piece. If we've got strong aspirations, if we want to take something forward for our citizens, and we know the technology is not there, but you've been looking in the same direction, we will work with you on that. We will buy something on the basis of it developing over that time. But one of the things I see often is that at the point where the sale happens, or the contract's entered into, the research and development budget for that product seems to start to drop away, and it sits within the contract financials, which are normally a lot tighter than a development budget would be. So kind of the private sector, to make sure if we enter into a development piece with you, that you're going to keep the money there, when we will keep the faith, and we will give you our staff to help analyze data or consider different trials and such like. I think there's a lot of opportunity still out there to do that. We are in Barnet really keen to make ANPR a lot more effective and to bring that data all together. So we've, part of our contract at the moment is all about all the different data sources that we've got about the individual parking stays and how long people are staying for versus paid parking, putting ANPR equipment up at our camera and our car park sites, so that we can capture the actual data versus transaction data. And that's informing whether we hold a market, whether we pursue the nighttime economy, whether we dispose of these car parks. We interface with all of our on-street data as well to tell us, have we got parking stress here? Should we be changing tariffs? Should we be changing controls? And using all that data a lot more richly. But I think if we hadn't put that kind of front and center in the contract, we'd probably still be scratching our heads around that.
So Phil, there was also an interesting statement following this. So Erwin also asked you the question about the PPPs. He also said that most recently private involves a potential investor and a technology company, which is typically then a startup. So that matches what you just shared with the audience as well. Because so the idea is that it's not going to be the city investing in the development, but you're waiting for an external party to do that and then provide your data.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's a fair comment. I think there's a few of us sitting at some big investments and wondering who's going to take the first leap, because there's huge risk, but there's also a lot of opportunity. I think that needs probably more central government guidance, because it is of national importance. And I think, on the local government side, and I think on industry bodies side, the using our influences through those mediums is probably a really important thing to be doing at the moment, to get that central strategic guidance to us all, because
No,
nobody wants to invent Betamax.
no. No, that's true. So, Phil, we're approaching the end of your time slot.
Yeah.
So, what we can do, we have a short 15-minute break right now. So, perhaps this is a good time to wrap up the presentation. Also, to inform the audience, if you have another question for Phil, this is your chance to do so. So, Phil, feel free. You can fill up the coffee break that we have embedded in our program for now, but perhaps a good idea to wrap it up and see if our audience still has some questions for you.
Yeah, I mean, previous experience, we're all a product of it, and it can be a small incident, can knock a particular innovation, like I was talking about in Barnet, can knock it off course for a while. But one of the things that we always have to do as councils is provide our statutory services. There's always got to be a public transport network. There's got to be managed highways. And operators come in and out of those markets in a way that councils don't have the option to. So kind of understanding that the great idea, there's this game changer, that is a risk that's being asked on councils for potentially the upside of our citizens, but also of the private sector. We don't share risk in the same way, and we can't share the upsides in the same way. What we are enablers, and sort of talking to us early so we understand the potential and can work with you so you can maximize that potential for us and our citizens, is probably a really good way to go at evolving ideas and not becoming bogged down by the previous experiences that might otherwise make council officers a little bit reticent to give you time, or would make us make it a hard sell to take forward an experiment or a new novel service as we take it to our members, who ultimately at the end of the day, they're the ones that deal with the reams of complaints about things, and they are the ones that may not get re-elected as a result of it. So kind of understanding everybody's relationships and what each other's drivers is probably my key takeaway from here, as well as establishing those relationships and getting those ideas into local government officers' heads at an early opportunity. So if you've got any ideas you want to put in my head, clearly I think I've probably expended all the ideas I've got for the moment. Feel free to fire them my way through the contact details. And thank you very much, Steph.
There I am. Thanks ever so much, Phil, for doing this, and I'm sure this was a great insight for us parking professionals. And it's been an honor to have somebody from London share all this insight. I am wondering at the moment, are there any questions from the audience? Let's give it a minute to see if some questions roll in. There we go. So a question by Elena. She says, "Hi. How do you provide enforcement if people do not pay for the parking on street?"
Well, we have to put a ticket on the car. The law in the UK doesn't provide for us to do that by cameras for anything that's parking related, including in car parks. So we send somebody out there. But we've got smarter at the way we can identify that. We're presently going down streets with ANPR camera cars that identify those contraventions. And actually, they're really great for suburban areas where you don't find very many contraventions, but you have quite a lot of mileage to cover on your streets. So it's pretty simple. It's a piece of paper underneath a windscreen wiper, but there's a lot of technology that's sitting behind those. I don't know whether anything's going to change about the parking ticket until such a point as cars are almost unable to park illegally, with a level of automation and in-car technology, which will be make that almost impossible. And more of a concern for councils at that point will be that the key income source has gone away. So yeah, it's pretty easy in London, and also probably fairly similar across the world.
So Elena's asking, so LPR is not allowed, but I don't think that's true.
Pardon?
Elena's asking if she's concluding, so LPR is not allowed, but I don't think that's the case.
LPR standing for?
License plate recognition, sorry.
Oh, yeah. So using, basically, we can't issue a ticket by post. So we use ANPR to identify the vehicles. We then just check that against our transactions database. Have they got a permit or have they got a paid parking stay? And if it goes ping, there's somebody there that hasn't, it will then alert a real human officer on their handheld to go to that point and do further checks. Might be that they've got a blue badge on display, great. Might be that they are just loading things from their car, that's fine. You know, all the usual exemptions that apply still get checked, but the use of that vehicle is much more about, well, it saves sending officers to go and walk up and down streets where they may walk for 10 streets without seeing anything at all. It's about, you know, kind of using our resources well.
Great, thanks. Any more questions from the audience for Phil, please? And otherwise, I think, Phil, you shared a real clear story about your experience in parking.
Thank you. So, well, there's always more stories about parking, but that's probably for a Friday afternoon. Yeah, thank you everyone for listening, and enjoy the rest of today. Obviously, there's questions later on at 1:30, was it, or 1:15?
It's 1:15. We're gonna continue with a presentation by Tech, presented by Mehdi. So, and in between we have to make room for a little coffee break for everyone. So that's what we're gonna do right now. So everyone, in about 7 minutes, we'll be back with Tech's presentation. And I'm sure it will be extremely interesting, and obviously there's more to come. So Phil, thanks so much. Feel free to join the rest of the day. I'm sure there will be some presentations interesting for you as well, especially regarding capturing data in cities and using this data to improve your parking operation. So feel free to join the rest of the day as well. And we're now going to go for a short coffee break, and we'll be back in about 5 minutes with Mehdi's presentation. Thanks, Phil.
Cool, thank you.